Enjoy your movie.
Thanks, you too.
Huh? Alright, here you go. Enjoy your movie.
Thanks, you too.
Damn it!
Hello and welcome back to Gamebox, show we take a look at games of yesteryear. And today, we'll be taking a look at a game from the PlayStation 2 era. A game that has quite a legacy. A game that is part of a series that happens to be one of my favorite game series of all time. A little game called Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time.
Did I say two? Excuse me. We were three.
Prince of Persia was originally created by Jordan Mechner, which was released back in 1989. This version of the game had the player take control of a nameless prince who needs to escape a dungeon in order to save the love of his life from vile fate, all within an hour. In fact, it was so beloved that it was ported to numerous systems, which include NEC PC 9801, MS-DOS, Amiga, Atari, Sharp X6 8000, Amstrad CPC, SAM Coupe, TurboGrafx 16, Game Boy, Game Boy Color, FM Towns, Master System, NES, Super NES, Sega CD, Macintosh, Game Gear, Genesis, Nintendo 3DS, Wii, and finally, iOS. Despite having positive reception, it was still seen as a commercial failure in the US. However, later in its life, it would end up selling 2 million copies by the time the sequel was released. Prince of Persia 2: The Shadow and the Flame was released in 1993. Both games were developed by Broderbund? These guys. Prince of Persia 2 would be well received like its predecessor. Both games are praised for their fantastic character animations, which use a process known as rotoscoping, a process that is essentially tracing over live action footage, a technique that isn't seen too much nowadays. Later, the prince would make a jump to 3D in Prince of Persia 3D, which was released in 1999 for PC, and was developed and published by Red Orb Entertainment, and the Dreamcast version was developed by Avalanche Software and published by Mattel Interactive, which was released back in 2000, and was labeled under a different title, Prince of Persia: Arabian Nights. Both versions of the game were met with mixed reviews. Now, fast forward to 2001. At this time, Ubisoft had bought the Prince of Persia license. Though Ubisoft held the Prince of Persia name, the actual IP still belonged to the series creator, Jordan Mechner. However, Mechner was reluctant to work on Prince of Persia due to his poor experience with Prince of Persia 3D. Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time was developed by Ubisoft Montreal, who had been working on Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell, another game I want to cover. Ubisoft asked Mechner to come down and help out with development. After being shown some work, Mechner was impressed and decided to jump aboard as creative consultant. Later down the line, Mechner became the game's designer and writer. Production went into full swing June 2001. Development for Sands of Time ran parallel with Splinter Cell. As researched, the development team read 1001 Nights, a collection of Middle Eastern stories, which also happened to be used as inspiration for Mechner for the original Prince of Persia game. The original draft for the game was, for lack of a better word, bloated. There were several characters originally planned, including the prince, 2 love interests, 2 villains, and 2 helper characters, which were all meant to represent different political factions. The setting was to take place in the prince's homestead. However, this concept was scrapped as it impeded on other parts of development. The development team went back to square one. The team decided to go with the Sands of Time idea. There were 4 key items the team kept in mind during development: unity of time and place, acrobatics, combat, and rewind. Now, one would think since Prince of Persia 3D was a 3D platformer, it would be the go-to when it comes to reference. Yes? Wrong. In fact, the development team made a decision early on to not refer to Prince of Persia 3D at all, instead opting to use the original Prince of Persia as their building blocks. They wanted to capture the feeling of adventure that the original game had. One influence on the development of Prince of Persia was the game Ico, developed by Team Ico back in 2001. In order to get the realistic movements, the team used motion capture to animate the characters. Prince of Persia ran off an updated version of the Jade engine, the same engine that was used in Beyond Good and Evil. Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time was released on PlayStation 2 November 10th, 2003 for the US and November 21st, 2003 in Europe, as well as both GameCube and Xbox on December 5th, 2003 in the US and November 20th, 2004 in Europe. and for Windows on December 2nd, 2003 in the US and December 5th, 2003 in Europe, even being released on the Game Boy Advance on October 28, 2005 in the US and November 14, 2003 in Europe. It was also re-released on PlayStation 3 November 16, 2010. Sands of Time, much like the original two games, was received very well, receiving very good scores. And with that, let's take a look at today's game.
People think time is like a river that flows swift and sure in one direction.
Set in Persia, the story begins as the prince recounts the events of the game. The actual story the prince tells begins at the start of a battle between the prince's father, Shahraman, and the local Maharaja, an attack that is only possible by the treacherous actions of the vizier. The prince rides ahead, seeking out glory, not by slaying enemies, which he does, but by raiding the Maharaja's treasure vault. In doing so, the prince is able to obtain the object called the Dagger of Time, an item that grants the prince the ability to control time. After the siege, Shahraman and his army take the spoils of the battle to the Sultan of Azad. These gifts include the hourglass, which holds the Sands of Time, and Farah, the conquered Maharaja's daughter. While at the palace of the Sultan, Shahraman presents his gifts. The Sultan is entranced by the magical glow of the sands within the hourglass. The vizier sees his chance and convinces the prince to use the dagger to release the sands to the protests of Farah. Upon the sands spilling out of the hourglass, everyone is attacked by the sands and transformed into monsters. The vizier tells the prince that he can undo the chaos, and all the prince has to do is give him the dagger. The prince flees and now is on a quest to return to the hourglass and undo his mistake. Sands of Time is a third-person action-adventure game. The prince can run along walls and parkour with the best of them, which is one of the big bullet points of the game, and it works very well, even after all this time. There is combat, and it works fine as well. There are different moves the prince can perform. The prince can leap over some enemies and strike at them. Some of the enemies are immune to some of the attacks. This will force the player to think about how they want to face a group of enemies. The prince also has abilities to aid in combat. There is the power of revival, which is the ability to rewind time. This is going to be the player's go-to power. This can be used to backpedal on some of the major boo-boos the prince may make. There is the power of delay, which is the ability to slow down time. This is actually a power only used by accident. This power slows down both the enemies and the prince, so not very useful. There is the power of restraint, which is the ability to freeze a single enemy. This power can be useful, giving the prince a second to breathe and also a chance to take out enemies quickly. There is also the power of haste, which is the ability to freeze multiple enemies in the immediate area, and allows the prince to dispatch enemies even faster. This is another power that will be very useful. If the player finds an enemy encounter too tough, bust out that haste. And finally, the power of destiny, which is the ability to see the future. This power can only be activated at the many save points. The enemies do vary in appearance. Some do have attacks that can be blocked, and as stated before, are immune to certain attacks. Some enemies can be jumped over and knocked down, while others will block and counter to knock the prince down, making him vulnerable to a second attack. But knocking them down may differ from enemy to enemy, but fully dispatching them will be the same. The dagger has to be used in order to absorb the downed enemies in order to make sure they don't get back up. There are a variety of puzzles, and they are very fun to figure out. So there is platforming in this game, and oh lordy, this is my jam. I love the platforming in this series. In fact, it was the game I used as an example in my Captain America Super Soldier review. Man, that was a long time ago. The platforming is just so fun and fluid to do. Damn, I'm good. There's also save points peppered around the game. Some of them are very close to each other, so if the player wanted to skip one and move on to the next one, they have the freedom to do so. Now, there are bosses. There are actually only two of them, those being the Sand King and the Vizier. Both play out kind of the same way, and both do require a bit of familiarity with the counter move. They are actually kind of tough, but in the end, brute force did prevail. A quick hint for the Vizier boss fight: attack him during his attack animation to get in some free hits, otherwise he'll just block your attacks and the fight will drag on. Besides the boss fights, there are sections where the prince has to survive an onslaught of tough enemies, in which case, haste will become the prince's best friend. Speaking of cohorts, Farah will be by the prince's side throughout a good majority of the game. She acts as a pretty confident side character, but the prince does have to make sure she doesn't bite the dust during fights. Otherwise, it's game over, bub. Unless you rewind. There are some items the prince can collect that are scattered around Azad, those being sand clouds. Collecting 8 of these bad boys will grant the prince a new sand tank. Once a new sand tank is created, the prince has to perform 16 retrieves in order to create a new power tank, which in turn grants the dagger new powers. There are also hidden magical fountains that permanently extend the prince's life bar. Both are very useful, and I recommend seeking them out. The prince can also obtain different weapons over the course of his journey. They're all the swish swish stab stab variety, but they get the job done. The only one that has a function outside of combat is the second sword, which is able to destroy weakened walls. But other than that, they all work the same. My favorite of the three is the final sword. Not only does it look cool, but it's also able to take out enemies in one hit. Now, I'm not going to say why he has it, I'll let you figure that out on your own.
There's no one here.
Now, I'm playing the HD remaster for this review, so it looks fine. There were some sound issues with the remaster, where the music was a bit louder than the voice acting, even one time where the dialogue skipped.
The honor and glory I would bring my father by fighting like a warrior.
There are also some very slight graphical issues that look kinky, but beyond those small nitpicks, it runs fine. The animation for movement holds up as well. The music was very well done, having that Middle Eastern twang. My favorite track is the one that plays during the ancient bath section. The same piece of music that's being used for background music for this video. The locations do have some variety to them. Since the game does take place in one location, that location being the Palace of Azad, they had to make sure to keep things fresh, and it does all look nice.
Sorry.
So all in all, is this a game you need to go out and play? Yes, a definite hard yes. Sands of Time is one of those games that stuck with me over the years. It remains one of my personal favorites. I mean, sure, the enemy encounters do run a bit long, and the boss fights were sparse. However, the platforming was fluid and responsive, and the banter between the Prince and Farah was fun to hear. It was very fun to go back through this game again. I would highly recommend you go pick it up and try it for yourself. The HD version is fine, but if you're able to get your hands on the PlayStation 2 version, that's cool too. There were some changes between the two versions. The main thing for me was the ability to unlock the original Prince of Persia, but in the HD collection, it's been removed altogether. The secret door where you can unlock the game is located here in the PlayStation 2 version, a bit after you get the second sword. The room can still be seen in the HD collection. The other secret is the ability to unlock a 3D version of the first level of the original game. Man, it'd be cool to see a full remake of this game. Hint, hint. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a gap to jump over. Oop. Hey! Welcome to the end of the video. I thank you for making it this far. So originally I was planning on doing Max Payne 2 for my next review, but my copy of the game was bad, resulting in my game freezing up. So that review is going to be put on hold until I get another copy. I'll be doing the Prince of Persia series instead, and the next one I'll be taking a look at is Prince of Persia Warrior Within. And that's going to be a thing. So until then, you know what to do, spread the awesome, and I will see you next time.